Today we talk about DevSecOps. And the first time I saw this word DevSecOps, I'm like, holy cow, this is yet another buzzword. Like, put it together with blockchain and machine learning, and we have a full buzzword bingo card. I'm like, God, is this really what we're going to talk about? What is the next thing? Biz, cloud, DevSec, whatever ops? But if you look at that word closely, it starts with the two white parts, DevOps. Things that we did or we tried to implement all together. And if you're uncertain if you're practicing DevOps, look at this. If your development team is now also responsible to getting the stuff into production, and if they call you at a certain time, something is wrong, you need to fix it, maybe even at 3 a.m. in the morning, then you're doing DevOps. If you own what you create, that is the essence of DevOps. Basically, you don't throw it over the wall like, hey, it works on my machine, now you fix it. That was the old-fashioned ways. But we tore down that wall, we glued it together, and now the team is responsible for what they create. However, we look at this thing from a functional or feature perspective. Look at your Kanban board or your Scrum board. What is the thing that says there? As a product manager, I would love if I click on X that it would do Y. Right? These kind of stories do you have. It's all on features. And nowadays, implicitly, we all think about scalability and maintainability because cloud era, blah, blah, blah. AWS costs us a lot of money if I just spin up a ton of things. These are already implicit, and security should be as well. That's why that security in the middle is so important. This is me. I'm Brian, Java champion. I do a lot of stuff in the community, running the Virtual JUG together with a few others, running the NLJUG, so that makes me based in the Netherlands, just a little bit south of Amsterdam. And I am a senior developer advocate for Snyk, mainly for the Java ecosystem, because that's where I worked for in the last 17 years or something. But that's not why we're here. We're here to solve a problem. And what is that problem? Well, that DevSecOps is there for a reason. Let me take you back to my personal story. And it started like 17-ish years ago, pandemic plus 2. 19 years ago, I worked at a government agency in the Netherlands, and they were quite conservative. Let's say it like that. We deployed our stuff 3 times a year. So that means we had a ton of time to make a release candidate, send it over to whoever wants to look at it, test it until they were tired of it, and then go to production. Before I joined Snyk, I worked at basically the Dutch competitor of Amazon. And we deployed 3 times a day. Good luck with your pen testing. That's not possible anymore. But because we need to be better, faster, and stronger than our competitors, that feature that I create needs to be out in the open as soon as possible because that gives me some sort of leverage over the competitor. Makes sense, right? But the problem is, we're feature-based. My product manager wants X and does Y. And we didn't focus on security at all. As in, I'm a builder. I'm building things. Spring Boot does this for me. And hey, if it works, ship it. But that gives you a problem because like we had developers and operations previously as 2 separate silos, our security engineers or our security team is still a siloed thing in the end. And there's the problem, it's at the end. We create stuff, a 3-week sprints or whatever you're doing, and after 3 weeks, that security engineer comes up to me and says, Brian, it's super nice what you did, but no. And I can handle that once. But if he does that 2 or 3 times, I'm getting angry at them. Like, I need to get this out because my product manager is breathing down my neck, get this feature out. And he's holding me back. Gives friction. On the other hand, if you look at him, he will say that Brian dude's just a cowboy. And in the end, we need to play along just like children on the playground. We need to make sure that our customer data won't get compromised. Okay, sure, all makes sense, but how bad is that? Well, let's go into application security in general. And I do this from a developer perspective. I'm not an InfoSec guy because that's like far reached in my opinion. Like it's all good, these theories, but how does that affect me as a developer? Well, if I look at security, the first thing you think about is your code, the code that you create. And that's a fair thing. I mean, that's what makes the difference between any generic Spring Boot Hello World application and the stuff that we need to do for our company or for our client. The business logic makes the difference, right? Anyhow, it's only 10 to 20% of the code I put into production. It's just a small amount. However, it's an important amount. And say I made that Spring Boot application, and the first thing I did was I created an endpoint like this. And silly as I am, I made already a mistake in there. And maybe you see it, maybe you don't, but I hope that you have things like code reviews in place, right? Or pair programming. Who does code reviews? Okay, I trust that the rest does pair programming. Good. Anyhow, this is the issue. I have a parameter that comes into my endpoint, and without doing any form of sanitization or validation, I write it directly back to the response writer. Basically 101 XSS, cross-site scripting type 2, reflective cross-site scripting. And if you're savvy on these things, and you do that with proper code reviews, you might catch this. But at the companies I worked for, code reviews was more like, no, that curly bracket is on the wrong line. It should be there. Like these kind of code reviews, I hate them. Think about it. How do you do code reviews? Do you look at features? Do you look at scalability, maintainability, but also do you look at security? I mean, if I do this, then it definitely ping up a script, and well, if I can do an alert, I can do all sorts of things like looking into whatever cookies or whatever you have, maybe get your session ID, get it back to another server. Worst things can happen. And it can be different, doesn't need to be a script, can be a mouse over or an image or all sorts of things. But wouldn't it be nice if during development I already got pinged? And it is easy. I believe that as a developer, we need to make sure that we are already aware of these kind of issues while we're developing, not after we commit it to our Git repository or when it hits our CI/CD pipeline. No, in my IDE or whatever tool you're using. Maybe if you use Notepad, it might be good to have a Maven integration in it. So if, I might have an IDE open, let me show you this. So for instance, in my IDE over here, and I will enlarge it in just a second, it tells me a cross-site scripting issue. Cool. It starts over here, ends over here, let's look at it. And indeed, it's exactly the issue that I told you. Right? Got the parameter here, and a problem here. But how do I solve it? I'm not security savvy at all. So let's look at it. It gives me an opportunity like, hey, maybe I can use string utils that escape HTML from the Apache Foundation. Makes sense. And again, this was an easy one, I get that. But how about this one? Path traversals. It says I have a path traversal in my file controller on line 69. Well, let's go there. Let's look whatever we do there. Oh, cool. Let me enlarge this. 1 second to actually get to the code. And what is the problem here? Well, I'm saving a file. It's a multi-part file here, just plain things I ripped off of Stack Overflow. And here I am uploading it to the upload folder. Seems right, huh? Only what if my get original file name, which is basically this is a post request. So the file name is just metadata. What if that file name is something like this? I'm just making up something. But if I do ... then we have a basic path traversal. But I didn't think of that as a developer because, again, I am feature-based. So these tools already help me, and of course this is a tool for my company, but any of these tools, there are multiples, can help you already save the easy pieces in that 10% of super important code. And this is something you might not get from a code review, because how many people think of this? And if we look back at what can be a solid solution, let's go, and it says here something like, this makes sense. Like, maybe I should look at the canonical path. That ... evaluates to something. Maybe I should check that before, if that actually starts with that upload path. instead of just blindly doing this. So, your own code. Quite important, and maybe we can already do something with it. Oh, how can I? Yes, unzoom. Maybe I can already do something with it while I'm coding. So I'm catching it early. I'm catching it often. But that was just 10 to 20%, right? Then we get to the other 90% of the code base. Who doesn't use any libraries or frameworks? That's what I was thinking. Probably you use Quarkus or Micronaut or Spring or something. That is practically 80 to 90% of that jar or that var or maybe even that error that you put into production is stuff you didn't write. And is there anybody in the room from that company called Equifax? I can freely talk about that, thank you. I'm not going into the company because I honestly believe they were a victim. But the point is, 2017, something awful happened. They used Apache struts. No, that's not what awful it is. They used an outdated version of Apache struts. And I honestly believe at that point, I'm not sure this is an assumption, but that the company had their stuff checked when it went into production. It might all be A-okay, but if something is in production for a while, new things can come up. People can find issues. Well, what happened is they were using Apache Strut 2. That was a vulnerable version of Apache Struts 2. And people could get into their system, and they didn't know. It took over 75 days before they found out. But even worse, that vulnerability was already found in, I think it was March of that year, 2017. The breach was in May. So not paying attention of what was already in production can be an issue if you're just focusing on new features. Took 75 days, over 140 million customers were compromised, and it cost them roughly more than $2 billion because we didn't calculate in what it does for damage to the brand. I believe that if you work at Equifax now, you have the most secure team in the world because they did a ton of stuff. So again, let's go into the exploit. What happened? I have an application here, and this application runs on Heroku. So big bad internet works. Cool. This application has that same Apache struts problem. But how can I get in? I don't need to go into the application because it's in the foundation. It's in their, base framework. So this is the problem. I can do a request using a specific header. And this is the actual header that I'm going to use. And that actual header is a content type. What could possibly go wrong? It's you probably recognize that content type. It's an invalid content type. And what happens in this specific version of Apache Struts 2, because there is an invalid content type, I am able to utilize the expression language in Apache Struts, OGNL, the Object Graph Navigational Language. With that language, I am able to, hit certain methods on certain objects. Or even worse, I can create new objects. That's exactly what I'm doing here. I am calling a new process builder. I am feeding it the bash, and I can feed it any arbitrary command. So I basically spin up a bash in a new process. Cool, let's try this. And which one let's use this one. And I will explain in a second what I'm doing here. So what I'm doing, I'm using that header I showed you, and I make a substitution. That word command is out, and the word env, which basically is the Linux command to get your environment variables, is in. I do a curl -v get request, not on localhost, because this one is on the real big bad internet. So let me copy this one. Let's go over there and remove that localhost and actually see if it also works on a real machine. So if I do this and I call this, because I reroute the output writer to an input writer, I can actually see what's coming in from that request. These are the environment variables of my Heroku system. So if I can do the environment variables, I can basically remote code execution. So I can create a file, I can put some content in that file, come back tomorrow, execute that file, and good luck with your postmortem finding out what the hell happened. The point is, the environment variables is not really a bad thing, but the fact that I can do this shows that I can do worse. Okay, now I know the Java options and I know the Java home. Boo-hoo. That's not important. The fact that I can execute code with a process builder by just doing an arbitrary curl request with a weird header, that is the problem. So they basically didn't find out until it was way, way too late. And that is because, hey, it was already out, but how do you check your dependencies if there are new updates when it's already in production? Something you need to think about. Also, if it's there and you need to upgrade, are you able to do that? Is your pipeline in such a mood or such a way that I can release right away if there's a new version? And for some companies, that is not the case. Anyway, this is awful, right? We agree. So let's get back to our own application. Say this is that application, this is the full jar or war you put in production, this is the code you wrote, just to make it thing. And we take good pride of the code that we wrote, we have tooling in place, or we do code reviews, as much of the, and some did pair programming, which I assumed. But how about the 90% that doesn't cover it? How are you doing that? Do you have a policy when a certain application or a certain package gets in? When does it get out? How do you know if there are any vulnerabilities in there? How are you handling that? I worked at a bank before, and I looked at their POM file, and there were 4 different XML marshallers in. God knows why. Because there are a few in the JDK already. Nobody knows, but it grew and it grew. New features on top of features on top of features. New teams didn't know what else was in there, and it's unnecessary. And it was all outdated. Well, that basically, if you're working with legacy software, you might want to scan to see if there are some libraries that might have a problem. Example, Spring Serverless example we created a few years ago. 222 lines of code, horrible code. I wrote it, demo code, lots of duplication. It's not an example I'm proud of. Anyway, it had 5 direct dependencies. But using Maven or Gradle, we know that dependencies pull in dependencies several layers deep. How many dependencies do you think I'm pulling in? Just yell out loud if you feel like it. Make a guess. 100. It's not that bad. 54. But 222 lines of code, 54 dependencies. How many lines of code is my team responsible for? It's more than 1,000, trust me. Yes, more than 10,000, absolutely. Go, come on. Of course, yeah, how many lines of code is it, do you think? Because I'm only looking at the 222 lines because that's what's in my Git repo. 460,000 lines of code. And thinking about how Java works, every jar that is on the class path can technically be loaded into memory. It's not that it's sandboxed or something like that. So technically, we don't know what's going to happen. And you might say, like, some code is never reachable. Are you absolutely sure? I mean, we have weird things like serialization and reflection and spooky. Do you know that all that code is, if that code is reachable or not? When do you want to take that guess? Probably not. Because open source usage has exploded over the last decade or so, even more. And that's good. I'm an open source maintainer. I contribute to a few projects like Eclipse Collections, and I love it. However, if you look at the other side, people that have less good intentions also looking at it and see, what can I do with it? Because if there is an application that uses, or say that I have a package that is used by many applications, and there is a problem in it, I have a large pool of victims, potentially. And it's not potentially anymore. So every year, new packages came out, and of course, NPM is the clear winner. I think July 2019, they reached that 1 million package boundary, and there was that dude on Twitter that said, I posted the 1 millionth package on NPM. And everybody was like, how do you know for sure? Well, I created a script that posted like 1,000 packages at the same time, and I know for sure that I'm the millionth package. which says something about the quality in my opinion, but hey, I'm not judging. Anyway, every year new vulnerabilities get identified per ecosystem as well. It doesn't matter if you're Java, if you're NPM, if you're working in Python, we're using other people's code. And most of the problems are not so much in the things that are in our POM file, but what we implicitly use. Let me get back to that application I showed you before. Like, where do I have it? It was here. Cool. Let me sign up for that. And, well, let me use my name and my password. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because I work at a security company. Perfectly fine. No, don't save it. One of the things I can do, I can create to-dos. It's a to-do list. I can do something funny like eat pie with a pie sign, put it in 9070, and I'm probably hungry by now, so give it a high priority. And what it does, what you see is that pie sign is now translated into the ASCII representation, because there is a function called native to ASCII that is available on the JDK. Okay, hold that thought. What I can do as well, I can upload files. And what I can do here, I can upload zip files. That zip file gets unzipped, and all unzipped files will be in the My Files folder, which is currently empty. But what if my remember that this is Java home from that Heroku path? What if my zip file looks something like this? This zip file contains two files, a good.txt and a second file called // traverses all the way back to the root. Then /app/.jdk, which I just found out was the folder that the JDK is located on Heroku, /bin/native to ASCII. I am using a library to unzip this thing because unzipping in Java is painful. As in, there is no unzip function. You can search the file, you can go into the file, get the byte stream out, you need to recreate the file, get that byte stream in, etc., etc. You have the building blocks, but you need to do it yourself. So we're using a library for this. Well, what happens if I'm doing this? Let's upload this folder, let's upload this file. It's probably here. Yes, here. So I'm uploading this file, and let's see what happens. In my public folder, I see that good.txt is there, so unzipping took place. Awesome. But what's next? Well, what happened to the other file? So let's put something in. Give it a random date and give it whatever priority. It now comes back as, and it doesn't matter what I put in. Like if I put something in which is totally gibberish, everything will be muhaha, gotcha, because I overrode the native to ASCII file with that unzip on my Heroku machine. Why? Because this library didn't look at the canonical path for me. I'm just using it. And I had no idea because this was already in production for years. But it was fixed. I'm using 1.12 and 1.13 already has the fix, but I didn't update because I was too busy working on new features. In the end, this is up to you as a developer, as a development team, as a DevOps team, including your product manager. Because if this happens and you're not sure that this is happening, good luck finding out what actually did. This is up to us. And, well, recently there was a new thing, right? It's not just scary stories anymore. I mean, I don't know where you were at December 10th. I had my first day on vacation. I was planning to fly. I'm living in Amsterdam. I was planning to fly to a nice Caribbean island because there was no pandemic there. It's actually true. And the Friday, I just took off to pack my bags. That didn't happen, that packing. Because I got pinged and it was like, there's a log4j thing. Yeah, sure, everybody uses logs. Went into that, well, we all know what happened, right? It blew up in our face. In the first 72 hours, over 800,000 attacks, most of them automatically, so scripted attacks. And we saw in our data from Snyk that almost 60% at that point in time had log4j as a transitive dependencies because where we're using frameworks, and we didn't even know if we had it. I will briefly go into the hack. You probably know this, right? Who doesn't know how this one works? At least one. Okay, cool. So I have an application, and that application, if it logs something with Log4j, so I have Log4j in an application, and it logs an error. And that makes sense if I log an error, say, if I log in with wrong credentials. Like I'm using a username, wrong password, you probably log an error, user X, wrong attempt, something like that. So there was a feature in Log4j that you could evaluate things. And with that, I could do a JNDI request, which made sense at that point in time. And you can argue, like, why the hell did they do this? It was already there since 2013. And with a JNDI request, I can also call an LDAP server. And say I own this LDAP server. What I do is that request is routed to my LDAP server, I give it a reference back, and that reference points to a precompiled Java class. And I serve it through an HTTP server or something like that. The point is, with older builds of Java, by default, we trusted that remote code repository. So that means that if that class was a gadget, we can make sure that it has a side effect, and we can make sure that it executes something. For instance, if it looks like this. So my evil class implements the object factory, and basically what I'm doing here is the runtime, execute the command, and I'm trying to open my calculator. So if I do that, let's try this. Oh, let me just put it here, yes. So I have probably an application here. I've got an application here, and it runs on an older Java version, 1.8 build 111. And I will tell you in a second why. So what I do, say I'm logging in with something bogus. This and this. Well, you see that I logged that failed logging attempt, right? Over here. So I know that the username will get printed. Good. And this is open source. I know it has Log4j. Cool. Let's try this. I have this LDAP server that I just showed you in the thing. I have this LDAP server running together with an HTTP server, and I just host that class that I showed you, that open my calculator thing, that evil.class. Okay, so if I just go to my local machine, this routes to my LDAP, and that gives back that reference to, let's see if it works. Oh, and there's the calculator. That means I can do remote code executions. And why is that? Well, the first thing, I was into this at that point, and what we saw in some blog posts was that they showed this. At first, we thought it was only older versions of Java that were vulnerable, because by default, that trust URL code base in the older versions was set to true, but in newer builds like Java 8 191 and up, it was set to false, so this couldn't happen anymore, right? Who knows what a deserialization gadget chain is? Okay, briefly. Somebody, thank you, appreciate it. You know what deserialization Java is, right? Like object to stream, stream back to an object. If that object is a gadget and it is available in your class path, I can still do the same. That means that if that object, if I deserialize it, and because I deserialize it, it triggers a side effect to, for instance, execute something, then I can pretty much do the same because that file is already available on my class path. Now, there will not be just one file, but if I have one file that can target such a chain, and instances a new object, that instances a new object, that instances a new object, and in the end there is an object that does the remote code execution, so I chain that, we call this a gadget chain. These are available by combinations of libraries that may be in your application already. I have an old slide somewhere from a research that Netflix did on their application years ago, and they found out by the use of 7 different libraries and the JDK, they found the gadget chain they didn't know about. That takes a hard time to do so. But if you have a gadget chain available that is already there, say I'm using the old Apache Commons Collections library version 3.1. And if you want to go into that, look into a single library or a single tool called Why So Serial. You can note that down, but that's all side effect. If you have such a gadget chain already available on your class path, Log4j is an enabler to execute that gadget chain, even though you're not using serialization yourself. Let me show you. So, this application, let me shut the normal one down, and let me spin up a second one, or a new one, in a Docker container. Oh, yeah, not down, I need to up it. So in the meantime, I know this has a gadget chain in it from a library, Apache Commons Collections version 3.1 that has a known gadget chain. So what I'm doing is, and I will show you the exploit code, I changed my LDAP server a tiny little bit. And instead of giving back a precompiled class, I am recreating that gadget chain, and then I'm executing this code. And this code is a code that executes a reverse shell. I want to create a reverse shell from my container back to my local host. But my container is now local. It can also be my Heroku machine. But I don't want to get caught by Heroku by doing some hacking stuff. So I do it on my local machine. So what I do is, instead of creating the class, I am now here using the transformers, and I use the invoke transformers from Apache Commons, and I'm basically getting the runtime again and executing it. And instead of giving a reference back, I'm now giving Java serialized data back, because I know the application has a vulnerable gadget chain. So let's try this. Even though this is a higher version of Java, and let me show you that, which version it is, 1.8322, so way beyond the 191 that has that weird flag on. So what I can do here is, let's do this one. Oh, let me reload this because it's a new server. Yes. So instead of going to my local host, I am in a Docker container, and this is normally how you go from a Docker container back to your local host. Again, port 9999, because that is still where my LDAP server runs, and now I'm using the second path Commons to have that Commons Collections library detail back. So to listen to a reverse shell, let's do an ncat to port 9001, because that's what I want to 9001. It's listening. Let's put something in, doesn't matter, and sign in. And what I now have, you see that it's now connected. And I'm root. So if you already have an executable gadget chain, or have a gadget chain available that can launch, in the end, code execution, Log4j is an enabler for that. So it's most certainly a Java deserialization issue. This means I have two problems. First, I have Apache Commons 3.1 in my thing and had to update, and Log4j. If I have both these things available, I can do this. Secondly, my Docker container doesn't have a specific user. And what is the default of a Docker container? Root. Good luck. Now I am in your system, I have terminal access, and I can do whatever the heck I want. So even though you're on newer Java versions, you're still vulnerable, and you probably don't know if you have a gadget chain available. That is the whole point I want to make. This is less of a vulnerability than the older one, of course, but still something to think of. And the best thing you can do is just update to the newer version, unless you're unable to. And then you need to think of your whole strategy. When do I update? Can I update? Can I release right away? Because it's not just updating a number. Make sure that you can release right away and ship it to your clients, or make it available. So, let me see where my slides are. Well, we asked people, how do you know about vulnerabilities? And unfortunately, 27% says, I won't. That is interesting. Also this call, like, who should be responsible for security? If we asked that, and we did that a year ago in our State of Open Source Security, and we asked folks, who do you think? And these were open source maintainers, security people, operations folks. And most of the people think that, at least for the application part, folks like me and you should be responsible for security as well. Makes sense. I'm solving a problem, right? People come up with me with a puzzle, hey, we need to do this. Okay, I'm a problem solver. Let me do this. Let me take in this library and to put in this code and it works, ship it. But nowadays, we think about scalability and maintainability, but we also need to think about that our options and our creations are secure. So it's up to us, not up to the security team. Well, a little bit of both. That's why both developers, security, and operations team need to think about it. But it's also up to us, and that's the point I want to make today. We talked about code, we talked about open source, and let's talk about the next thing under the hood, because nowadays it's not just shipping a jar anymore. You probably need to give you some sort of environment, and let's say a Docker container. In 2019, I did a research on Docker containers, just because, for the fun of it. I downloaded the 10 most commonly used base images from Docker Hub and scanned them for vulnerabilities. This was the result. Point I want to make is, if you create a Docker file, what is the first thing that you do? From Ubuntu, from Debian, from Maven, JDK, OpenJDK, whatever. You rely on somebody else's image. And all of these images were just, at that point in time, the latest image. Didn't put a specific hash or tag in. And the Node image had over 500 vulnerabilities. And that was not the problem of Node. No, it was based on a full-blown Debian operating system. Which makes me think, like, for my tiny, tiny microservice, do I need the full-blown Debian? Probably not. But hey, most people find, how should I create a Docker container? Find that on Stack Overflow, copy, paste, work, ship it. Because we're so fast-paced nowadays. And okay, I'm overreacting here. Point is, take care of that base image. Do I need all these binaries that ship with that base image for my application? Because if I can do a remote code execution like this, I might be able to use these binaries that are in there. And think about it. Security issues are not direct hits. Most of the time, they're not. The ones that are, like the log for JWAN in December, these will get big in the news. But most of them are a chain of problems connected together, ending up in something that might hurt your system. Do you want to take that guess? We ask people, when do you scan your Docker images for operating system vulnerabilities? And most of the people don't. Also, when it's in production, do you check it? Nah, 45% says I probably won't, which is dangerous, because the latest image now is not the latest image tomorrow or 3 weeks from now. So by just rebuilding your Docker image, if you use the latest, without changing any of your application code, might already solve a few things. But let me get into a few problems and just show you. I love that more. We saw this application already, but now you see it's on localhost because it runs in a container. Let me show you the container, not this one. I can skip this one. I can release this, terminate it. This one as well. Let me see where my other terminal is, because here. It runs in a container over here, and let me show you how the Docker file looks. Yes, I will blow this up, or I will zoom in a second. This is the Docker file. Using a multi-stage Docker file, using Maven 3 JDK 1 Slim to build my application, and then I copy the jar to a second stage, a Tomcat 8.5.21. 8.5.21 of Tomcat is quite old, and it has an issue. The issue I'm going to show you is this issue. So I don't need to touch your Java application. I'm just touching your Tomcat because here, it was possible to upload a JSP file to the server via a specially crafted request. The JSP file could contain code, and any code in that JSP file can be executed. That's fun. Exploit database. And this already is old. It's like 2017 or something. It's a Python script, and I will just explain that Python script to you in a second because I have it already set up in a container. What it does, the first step is it creates that specially crafted request, and it tries to insert a JSP file containing a out println with all A's, just to see if it executes, if it's visible. If it does, we can do the second step, and that's actually creating myself a JSP form, or a form in HTML, using some JSP, and in that form I have a text box and a button. And every time I hit that button, it does this. I get the runtime, get whatever is in that text box, and execute it. I'm creating myself a web shell. So let's try this. I don't need to touch that application. I'm just executing whatever I already have. And this is exactly the script I just showed you. So let's do, let me first show you that this page, the POC, which should have all A's, doesn't exist yet. I think it was, this doesn't work. Why doesn't this work? Let me do the second one right away because I know it works, and that's the PWN. And this one tries to upload the web shell, because in the end, that's what we want. This one didn't exist. Now it does exist. So I uploaded with that specially crafted request, I uploaded that form, and now I can say, who am I? I am root, because you saw that in that Docker container, I didn't specify any specific user. So I made two mistakes. First of all, that user privileges, important. Don't just run a root Docker container because it works. Create a specific user. Secondly, I'm using an outdated Docker image, and without touching my application, I can use the vulnerabilities in the Docker base image to leverage and to get into your system. And because I'm root, I can do all sorts of things, something with packages, for instance, or, well, just see what's in the passwd file. I have root access. I have a shell at my disposal via the web browser because I'm using an outdated version of Tomcat. If I would have scanned my application and checked, I would have seen that it has a ton of vulnerabilities. And it says to me already, hey, you're using 8.5.21 that has over 600 vulnerabilities. Might be able to go to 8.5.78, which is basically a minor release. That brings me back to 61 vulnerabilities. And that also solves this one. So knowing what your base image is, scanning it, and acting accordingly is something we need to think about as well. We talked about code, we talked about open source, our dependencies, we talked about containers. And then the last one that's under the service is infrastructure as code, or your Kubernetes files. Because nowadays it's not just a Docker container. You probably need to set up a complete cluster. You need to orchestrate things. You want to automatically scale, and you have that all configured in YAML. Well, YAML is painful already. Let's agree on that. But you can do a lot of mistakes. You can make a lot of mistakes in misconfiguring these clusters. If you use Kubernetes, there's one, but also if you use things like completely different, like Terraform, and scanning them to make sure that you don't make silly mistakes and give a certain node privileges or that it's outward facing is something you want to be sure of. And as a developer, a Java developer, I need to do this, and I'm not really keen on the whole Kubernetes thing, how it works, because I know the basics, but I'm not a Kubernetes professional. Well, we can help you with that as well. I don't have a demo on it. What is the solution? I told you that we need to take care of all these things nowadays, not only your custom code anymore, but it's all these 4 things. But the solution is not just tooling. Of course, I work for a tooling company, but the solution starts with culture. We need to, as developers, we need to be aware that this is important. I make decisions on how to solve things, so I need to be aware that these are safe. Think about it the other way. What are my KPIs? As a developer, I want to create something. I would love to use new frameworks, new libraries, build. What is the core value of somebody in the security team? Let's narrow it down to not getting breached. If I just cowboy around and release 3 times a day, they cannot keep track of that anymore. So we should make that part of the team or part of my process as well. Think about it the other way around. You probably have that manager that breathes down your neck, I want that new feature today. Oh, that doesn't work tomorrow. And you can do that. But in the meantime, you might cut corners, you make sure that it's a proof of concept, and you know that proof of concepts are not proof of concepts. If they ship it, it's there, and you create a ton of technical debt. In the end, it means you cannot innovate anymore. And that's because management is pushing on you because they are driven by, let's simplify it to deliverables and revenue. But if we cut corners every single time, and we have to pay the price somewhere. Same holds for us as developers towards security in general. We need to play along, we need to think about it, we need to be responsible. If you don't have that in your company or your team, forget it. No tooling can help you. Satisfying a tool in the end because it's in your build pipeline and every test will be green. Trust me, the first thing I normally did was how can I get it green without getting bothered too much? I will write a script around that. And that doesn't help. Secondly, it's process. How do you currently work? Look at the way you work now. And let's see if we can integrate security in the way you work now instead of creating more process. Like, hey, you have to check all these boxes, you have to do all these manual tests. That doesn't work. Look at the way how you work now. Say, for instance, you don't have a CI pipeline. Hopefully that's not the case. But I deploy directly from my laptop to my machine. It doesn't make sense to make a CI pipeline just for this, because people will still deploy from their local machines in the end. Also, look at the process, how you release stuff in general. Even if I have the information, can I update? Can I release? Can I ship this to my clients right away? And then there's tooling. Don't just pick tooling. Pick tooling that fits your process. So do it the other way around. Don't say like, here we have a tool, if all tests are green, we can go to production or else we block it. Hey, maybe I'm comfortable with a certain amount of vulnerabilities because they don't hit me. That is up to you. It's your context, right? So if I'm just satisfying a tool for the sake of satisfying a tool, doesn't make sense. Of course, we have products that can do all these things. So these slides are done. But most importantly is, if we can help you with your code, your open source libraries, your containers, whatever tool you pick, make sure you apply it in every stage of your life cycle. I mean, a lot of people say shift left, and I'm so done with that phrase because it doesn't make sense. Shift left, what they mean is, in this picture, start from the left-hand side. So on the local machine of the developer, make them part of it, make sure that they can scan it with the tools they need, either an IDE plugin or a CLI tool or a Maven integration. Cool, makes sense. Then the next step would be your Git repository. Connect that to a scanning tool for your code, your Docker containers, your everything, because it lives there for a while. And if somebody creates a pull request, you don't want to get worse, you want to get better, preferably. You have a CI pipeline, integrate in there as well. It's not or, it's and. And if you're okay with a certain amount of vulnerabilities, you go to production. But then you're not done, because you still need to monitor that. If you can do a monitor, for instance, your dependencies at that point are static. Your Docker container, the base image, is static. Why not scan that on a daily basis and chime you actively when some new things come up or there is a new fix available? That would help you instead of work against you. But the whole problem I have with shifting left is there is no left in a continuous process. If you look at it from a waterfall perspective, yes, there is a left or a right or an up and a down, but this is constantly working because you know that if we create a POC, they probably come back with a new feature, they probably come back with a bug and a fix, and it's constantly going. So just doing it at one place is not enough. making sure that in every stage of that software development lifecycle, how they call it in marketing, you do such scanning, like you do with unit tests. You test on your local machine, and you probably also test in your CI pipeline before you go to production, right? At least if you're responsible, you should do that. And if you have a test suite. But I believe we're all good developers, we have a perfect test suite, and we do pair programming, again. So do this constantly, because it's a continuous process, and we cannot rely fully on the security team, because the security team is one team serving 1 million engineering teams. And the engineering teams might scale up, and more engineering teams are coming up. So we need to get that down to the engineering teams, as part of these teams, as part of that mindset. My story is, today, use the proper process, the proper culture, create the proper culture, and use the tooling that fits that process, and make sure that you as developers take care of your application in the same amount that you do with scalability and maintainability and all these abilities, that security is one of them. Thank you so much. This was my talk for today. For those who are interested, we have a booth over here. We have a challenge that if you are having a public Git repository that has vulnerabilities and that you can influence, as in you can commit to, scan it before or scan it now, fix some vulnerabilities either using our tooling or any other tooling, and if you are the most fixes, we will have some prizes for you. And yes, you can fork anybody's repository, I don't care. That's the shortcut. If you find a repository from somebody else, fork it, fix the vulnerabilities, get on the leaderboard that's on our booth, and you might be able to win something. That's what we do for today. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Cheers. Are there any questions in the meantime? If not now, I am at the booth, like booth 13, or wandering around here, or come up right away. It's also cool. Thank you so much.